Sometime that afternoon, a note had been slipped to Sam Cooke's dressing room. No name, no explanation, just one line in careful handwriting. "I was going to be there tonight. I'm sorry I couldn't make it." Sam had read it once. He had folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. And that night, when he walked onto the stage and saw the empty seat in the front row, he understood. Sam Cooke walked onto the stage to a full standing ovation. Every seat in that concert hall was taken, every seat except one, front row, center. And Sam Cooke stood at the microphone and looked at that empty seat and did not sing. The band waited, the crowd waited, and Sam just looked. 3,000 people were in that hall, but Sam Cooke was somewhere else entirely. He was in a letter. He was in a year's worth of letters. Careful handwriting, honest words, the particular intimacy of two people who had never met in person but knew each other in every way that mattered. And now one of them was gone, and the seat was empty, and the song had nowhere to go. Or so it seemed to everyone watching, but Sam knew exactly where it was going, because he knew exactly who that seat belonged to, and he knew exactly what 18 months of letters had built between two people who had never stood in the same room. Sam had written back to Dorothy for the first time on a Tuesday night in early 1962, not through his assistant, not with a printed response, but himself, sitting at his desk late at night, writing to a schoolteacher in Tennessee who had said something true about his music and deserved a true response. And then she had written again, and he had written again, and somewhere in the back and forth of those letters, across 18 months and 2 states, something had formed that neither of them had a precise word for. Sam had reserved that seat himself 3 weeks earlier when Dorothy had written to say she was coming to the concert, her first Sam Cooke concert after 18 months of letters. He had personally made sure the best seat in the house was waiting for her, front row, center, so she could hear every note the way he had always imagined she heard his records, alone, completely present, taking in every word. And now the seat was empty, and Sam knew why. Dorothy Mae Collins had been a school teacher in Nashville, Tennessee for 23 years. She taught 5th grade at a public school in a neighborhood that the city had been promising to improve for as long as anyone could remember, a neighborhood where the school's windows rattled in winter and the textbooks were always a few years out of date, and the children who sat in Dorothy's classroom arrived every morning carrying more than children their age should have to carry. Dorothy had chosen this work deliberately and stayed with it deliberately, the way certain people stay with difficult things, not because it was easy or well compensated or appreciated in the ways that would have made it easier, but because it was the right thing to be doing, and Dorothy Collins was a woman who did the right thing, even when the right thing asked a great deal of her. She lived alone in a small house on a quiet street. She had never married, not because she hadn't wanted to or hadn't had the opportunity, but because the right circumstances had never aligned in the right way at the right time. And at some point she had made peace with that and built a life that was full in other ways. Her students, her garden, her books, her records, a careful collection built over decades that represented the music she had loved since she was a girl in a house where music was always playing. Sam Cooke had been part of that collection since the beginning. His voice had been part of the background of her adult life, present in the evenings when she was grading papers, present on Sunday mornings when she was moving slowly through the house, present in the particular way that music is present when it has been with you long enough to become part of how you experience time. She had written to Sam Cooke because of a song, not You Send Me or Wonderful World or any of the songs that everyone knew, a smaller song, a quieter one that had come on the radio one evening while Dorothy was grading papers at her kitchen table and had made her stop grading and simply listen. She had listened to the whole song without moving, and when it ended, she had sat for a long time in her kitchen thinking about what music could do when it was made by someone who understood something true. She had written the letter the following morning. She had not expected a response. Sam's response arrived 11 days later, written in his own hand on plain stationery. It was 3 paragraphs long. It said that her letter had made him think about things he had not thought about in a long time. It asked what she was teaching her students that year. It said he would like to hear more about that if she was willing to write again. She was willing.
The letters that followed were not the letters of a celebrity and a fan. They were the letters of 2 people who had found, unexpectedly, someone who thought seriously about similar things and was willing to say so in writing. Dorothy wrote about her students, about the specific children, their names, their particular qualities, the small victories and heartbreaks that accumulated over a school year. She wrote about a boy named Calvin who had arrived in September unable to read and had, by March, read his first full book and brought it to her desk to show her with an expression that she said she would carry with her for the rest of her life. She wrote about a girl named Shirley who sang to herself during recess with a voice that Dorothy thought was extraordinary and who had no idea anyone was listening. She wrote about the work of teaching as she actually experienced it, not the version that appeared in speeches about education, but the real version, with its tedium and its sudden unexpected grace and its absolute requirement that you show up completely every single day, regardless of what you are carrying. Sam wrote about music, not the business of it, but the interior of it, the questions he carried about what it was for and who it reached, and what responsibility came with a voice that could reach so many people. He wrote about songs that had failed to say what he wanted them to say, and the frustration of knowing something was true and not being able to find the language for it. He wrote about the experience of performing, about what it felt like to be on a stage in front of thousands of people and sense in certain moments that something was happening that went beyond entertainment, that the music was doing something to the room that he hadn't fully planned and didn't entirely understand.
They wrote about their childhoods. They wrote about their parents. Dorothy wrote about her mother who had died 3 years earlier and whose absence she was still learning to navigate. Sam wrote about his father and the hallway and the door, things he had never written about to anyone, things that had no place in the public version of his life, but that felt, in the context of these letters, like the truest things he could offer. A woman named Ruth, who taught alongside Dorothy at the school and was her closest friend, later described the change she noticed in Dorothy during those 18 months. She said Dorothy seemed lighter somehow. Not happier, exactly. Dorothy was a serious person, and seriousness was part of what made her good at her work. But lighter, as if something that had been sitting on her had been partially lifted. Ruth had asked once what was different. Dorothy had smiled and said she had been having a very good conversation. The concert had been Dorothy's idea. She had written in her most recent letter that she was thinking of coming, that she had never seen Sam perform live, and that after 18 months of letters she felt she ought to, at least once. Sam had written back within a week. He had told her the date and the city and said he would make sure there was a seat waiting for her, front row, center. He wanted her to hear it properly. Dorothy had written back to confirm. She had said she was looking forward to it more than she had looked forward to anything in a long time. She had said she was a little nervous, which surprised her. She had said she thought she might finally understand, seeing him on a stage, what all those thousands of people felt when they heard him sing. She had said, "I'll be there." 3 days before the concert, Dorothy Collins had a stroke. She died in a Nashville hospital on a Tuesday morning, quietly, with Ruth sitting beside her. She was 53 years old.
The note had been written by Ruth. She had found Sam's address in Dorothy's letters. Dorothy had kept every letter Sam had sent in a careful stack tied with string in the drawer of her writing desk, and she had written one line on a piece of paper and sent it to the concert hall because she didn't know what else to do, and she thought someone should know. Sam had received it that afternoon. He had read it standing in his dressing room, and he had not said anything for a long time. The people who were with him described a stillness that was different from his ordinary stillness, the stillness of someone absorbing something that doesn't have an immediate response. He had folded the note. He had put it in his jacket pocket. He had gone to the stage. And when he saw the empty seat, the seat he had reserved himself, front row, center, so Dorothy could hear it properly, he had stood at the microphone and not sung. Because for a moment he genuinely didn't know what you do with a song when the person it was meant for can no longer hear it. The band waited. The crowd waited. 3,000 people in complete silence, not understanding, just sensing that something was happening on that stage that had nothing to do with the show they had come to see. Sam's hand tightened on the microphone. He looked at the empty seat for a long moment, and then he looked up at the crowd, at the 3,000 faces looking back at him, and he said quietly into the microphone, "This song was meant for someone who couldn't make it tonight." He looked back at the empty seat, and he began to sing.
What Sam Cooke sang to an empty seat in Nashville 1963 was not a performance. The 3,000 people who were there understood this immediately and completely, in the way that audiences understand things that cannot be explained. The particular quality of a voice that has stopped performing and started simply being present to something. He sang to the empty seat the way you speak to someone who is not in the room, but whom you need to speak to anyway, directly, without artifice, without any of the craft that usually stood between Sam Cooke and the raw interior of what he felt. The crowd was completely still. Some people were crying without fully understanding why. The song moved through the hall and fell into the empty seat and went wherever songs go when the person they were made for is no longer there to receive them. When the song ended, Sam stood for a moment in the silence. Then he looked at the empty seat one final time, and he said, so quietly that people in the back rows had to piece together afterward what he had said from the people who had been closer, "I hope you heard it." He sang for another 2 hours that night. The show continued. The crowd responded the way crowds respond to Sam Cooke, with the particular joy that his voice produced in people, the warmth, the sense of something being given freely and received completely. But the people who were there that night said that everything that followed felt different, deeper somehow, more considered, as if Sam was singing with the knowledge, newly acquired and irreversible, that every person in the room was someone, that every seat that was filled by a person with a life, with letters in a drawer, with someone who might write a note that arrived too late. After the show, Sam found Ruth's address through the letter she had sent. He wrote to her the following week, a single page in his own hand, thanking her for letting him know. He said Dorothy had been one of the most honest people he had ever corresponded with. He said he had learned things from her letters that he had not expected to learn. He said he was glad she had come to the hall in the only way she could. Ruth kept that letter for the rest of her life. She kept it in the same drawer where Dorothy had kept Sam's letters, alongside the careful stack tied with string, alongside 18 months of conversation between a singer and a schoolteacher who had found each other across the distance of everything that should have kept them apart. Sam Cooke died 14 months later. He was 33 years old. He never knew that Ruth had placed his final letter in that drawer.
He never knew that the two stacks of letters, his to Dorothy, Dorothy's to him, had ended up side by side, tied with the same string, in the writing desk of a schoolteacher in Nashville who had simply wanted to say something true about a song she had heard on the radio one evening while grading papers at her kitchen table. Some conversations begin in the most ordinary moments. Some of them end before they should, but the words that were exchanged, the true ones, the careful ones, the ones written late at night by people who took each other seriously, those don't end. They stay in the drawer. They stay in the room. They stay in the empty seat at the front of the hall, waiting for the song that was always meant for them. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe. Every day we tell the stories behind the music, the private moments that shaped the legend. Hit the like button if you believe that the most important conversations sometimes happen between people who never meet. And tell us in the comments, have you ever lost someone before you got the chance to show them what they meant to you? Because Sam Cooke sang to an empty seat for Dorothy, and I hope she heard it. We'll see you in the next one.